Hello and welcome to another episode of the Syndicate podcast with myself, Shane Story, and my co-host Lawrence King. It's our first episode in about a month before Christmas. Apologies for the absence. But anyway, today on the podcast we have a very special guest. So we have Bryce Krawczyk on. So Bryce is one of the owners of Calgary Barbell. So if you haven't checked out that YouTube channel, I 100% would recommend it to all my clients when I'm giving them a deadlift fix or squat fix. But Bryce is also a very high level powerlifter. So he has almost total 900 in the 120 class. So total 895.5 at the last Worlds, has a world record deadlift. He also competes in single ply too, multiple time Canada powerlifting champion. So Bryce, welcome to the podcast. Pleasure to have you on.
Thanks for having me.
Tell the people at home a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So I feel like you did a pretty good job of kind of some of the things up there. I've been lifting this is my decade. 2022 will be a decade of competing for me. So nice. That's kind of wild to realize as I start to talk to people about the trip so far in the last little while. But yeah, so I got into lifting basically because I felt pretty unhealthy. I was a really skinny guy. I didn't want to be skinny anymore, and kind of fell in love with lifting weights. Then shortly decided that I needed something more than just lifting for the sake of lifting. And at the time I was kind of also getting into wouldn't call it coaching, but like personal training, working with sort of more of a gen pop group of people. I think my first exposure to that was a group of like middle-aged moms and doing like circuit training stuff, so got into all this stuff kind of around the same time, and then very quickly realized I wanted to compete. My boss at the time was a bodybuilder, and I just had no interest in bodybuilding, but he did powerlifting competitions in the off season. So he was like, well, why don't you try this out? I'll take you to this meet, and you can do your first one with me. And pretty much once the lights went up on that first squat, that was it. I've been locked in since. And yeah, so I've been competing quite a while. I've been fortunate enough to enjoy a lot of success on the national level and some success on the international level, and break some world records, both raw and equipped. And yeah, I don't know, do a bunch of cool stuff, get to coach a lot of awesome people and meet awesome people and do stuff like this and have podcasts and talk about lifting. And now we're building out this like combination studio private gym kind of thing here in Calgary, so we can hopefully sort of step our game up. The closures have been not hard, but it's really introduced an element of uncertainty with when we're going to be able to create the content that we want to work on. And the backdrop that we have is the gym here, which is public. And I think it during the pandemic became really, really important for people to be able to access that when they could. So we didn't want to overstep and go in and say, hey, we're going to like mess with the lighting and turn off all the music and, take up half the gym for 4 hours when people are like, only able to train for a little bit of time, and it's uncertain as to how long the gym's going to be open. And, there might be another closure coming and these kinds of things. So yeah, that's I guess a long-winded way of kind of getting from there to here, but that's the story more or less.
I suppose Bruce, but we'll call you Bruce for anybody listening.
I've been called worse.
Yeah, for anybody listening, we're going to call you Bruce. We're just going to add an extra spicy variable there. But for anybody listening, we kind of do always kind of ask guests. I suppose you said one thing there. From the second you come up off your opening squat, you saw 3 white lights and you were hooked. What was it about powerlifting specifically that kind of ignited that interest?
That's a good question. I think it was the support. I think it was the fact that like all these people who I had never met, who I was like competing against, in air quotes, against, were all so stoked for me. You know what I mean? And it was just this instant sort of bond and this camaraderie. And I think I've always kind of been drawn to the community aspect of things. And, a lot of that's shifted online now, just because of the way things are. But Certainly. I think the biggest thing for me was feeling like I had peers. And then soon after that, once I got to, there was a provincial championships that I competed at in 2014, I want to say. And it was one of those matchups where it was me and this other guy, and we were head to head the whole way through, down to the last deadlift. Could have gone either way. And I came out on top and I won. And that was the best feeling I'd ever felt. And it wasn't because I had won, it was more because we had this really intense competition throughout. And I realized how much of an outlet for me that is, and how cathartic that is for me, and how rewarding it is to be able to go and kind of actualize all the work and the sacrifices and the, all the things that go into building the total, to be able to put it together. I had a really good day lifting on top of it all. So I think for me, that sort of actualization of all that effort in a very, very concentrated period of time is just such a high that I can't get that anywhere else,
So you started you did your first comp in 2012. Nobody goes from their first meet to being Bryce Krawczyk, IPF world record holder. That just doesn't happen. So you've been in here for a decade. You've done the hard slog. So those 2 years, can you just kind of maybe talk about it? Or
yeah, for sure. So I guess from a training standpoint, the first stuff I ever did was 5-3-1. I was reading Wendler's book. I bought his 5-3-1 for powerlifting, which is basically 5-3-1 with some singles thrown into it. So I ran that into my first competition and did pretty well in my first competition in terms of expectations and how training went and stuff like that. And then after that, I had the really, really, really bright idea of combining 5-3-1 with Small Love Jr. for my bench with Chad Wesley Smith's West Side for raw lifters. So I mashed all three of those together, and I think it was it's maybe 3 weeks out. I tweaked my back really bad. And not because of that, but I did end up bombing out of my second meet. I got a depth call on my first. Pretty sure I went up. Maybe got a depth call on my second as well. And then my third went way too deep and wasn't able to come back up. So questionable decisions. I think one of the biggest things for that period of time for me, though, was it was really characteristic of a heavy obsession. Everything I did, everything I talked about, everything I thought about, I eat, slept, drank, everything was powerlifting. Every single morsel of anything I could get my hands on, anybody who wanted to talk about it, anybody who wrote anything, I was absolutely obsessed at that point in time, which put a lot of stress on a lot of things at that point in my life. But yeah, that was kind of how that went. And then I want to say it was maybe 3 years later, I ended up hooking up with Mike T in around late 2015. I think he and I started working together. So I went through a couple other coaches and kind of didn't really find what I was looking for, and then found coaching in 2015. And I feel like that's when things really took off for me, was when I started to get things structured, started to be more intelligent about my training,
Yeah. So then kind of you going from that, I suppose, like you said, obsessive, almost consumed person.
Completely. Yeah.
What was the kind of metamorphosis in this very collected, holistic person we have sitting before us now? How did you?
I think mostly just a lot of time.
Okay.
A lot of time, a lot of your entire identity is tied to your total. It's going to feel really bad, and if you don't have a support system, if you don't have people around you who care about you as more than just a power lifter, then that's going to be really hard, and it's going to be really hard to deal with. So I think, and especially for somebody like myself, where even though I am, I think, relatively balanced with things, it's still very much 70% of my life, because I train myself, I train others, I run a powerlifting company, I manage a team of coaches, we're building this HQ. It's still very much a humongous chunk of my life. So balance is still something that I think I find myself slipping on sometimes and needing to work on. But yeah, having good people around you is one way to really help, and hopefully learning through some hardships and things like that, how to better manage things and how to see yourself within powerlifting.
Absolutely. I suppose for a lot of young guys and girls maybe to get into powerlifting, people get into powerlifting for the very different reasons, but it's a community that's very easy to get wrapped up in, and it's very easy to become that almost meme or unidimensional person that we all laugh about on the internet, but we laugh about it because we know it's true, and we've all been that. But I suppose kind of like you said, like as you age and you encounter those setbacks and you kind of become a little bit more adjusted and a little bit more experienced, it's much easier to withdraw yourself from your self-worth and your efficacy kind of being attributed to that, I suppose, that number. Shane, do you have anything else you wanted to jump in there?
The community is always something that, like, anybody we've talked to, it's came back to the community, which, I mean, like, even myself, like, so funny enough, you were talking about your first coach or that did bodybuilding, but he did powerlifting in the off seasons. I'm now crossing over to the dark side this year to do a bodybuilding competition. Nice. Yeah, that's one thing that I definitely do not want to do. Like, me and Lawrence train in the same gym, and there's a huge community vibe down there. It's like the biggest powerlifting club in Ireland. But one thing I don't want to do is, because I'm transitioning over to like bodybuilding, to just become a bodybuilder and just train on my own in a bodybuilding gym. I definitely want to continue down in the community-based gym, because I mean, that's one reason I enjoy training so much, so yeah, I think having that there, like, for anybody listening, if you just train alone, like, even if you just find an online community, like, it's so worth it, because it's going to keep you training for decades. That's pretty much why the three of us are still here training, because we have people around us that are involved in the same thing, have the same goals, and we all kind of support each other.
I suppose one thing I'm kind of definitely interested, and I was saying it to Shane beforehand, you kind of have there's something a lot of powerlifters, I suppose, particularly IPF lifters, don't have in the modern era, which is experience in both equipped and raw. What was the kind of, which did you initially start in, and you kind of know which do you feel you're going to stick with?
So I definitely started classic. I started raw in 2012, and I didn't get into any sort of equipment until 2017. One of the catalysts for me getting into equipment was training felt stale. It felt tough because of my hip, and I felt like I was kind of spinning my wheels trying to get my momentum going again. Just kind of having to constantly deload, desensitize the hip, work my way back up, push to a point where the hip flared up again, and just, gradually kind of edging that ceiling ever so slightly higher. Getting into equipment allowed me pretty much to train, I would say, like 99% pain-free anytime I was in my suit. So it just, like, it really changed things. It gave me something else that I was, like, not good at, which means that there's a lot of room for growth. So every time I got into my suit, I was better and I was stronger and it was more comfortable, and my numbers just, like, went up and up and up and up and up as I learned how to use the stuff and got acclimated to a slightly different strength curve and all those kinds of things. So that was super, super exciting for me. And then came the prospect of international competition with that, and taking a shot at records and eventually breaking some. So it was a sort of reinvigorization. What's the it reinvigorated my training anyways. And just kind of helped me fall back in love with powerlifting in a slightly different way. And then coming back into 2021, 2022, I was able to have that same kind of transition out of equipment. My last equip meet was in 2020. And then because of the lockdowns and because I was training alone in my condo basement, I was just doing classic training. and had the same kind of feeling of like, oh, I'm a weight class up now. Things are feeling good. I'm, hit an all-time squat PR for the first time in 5 years, and my bench is going up and things are feeling great. So I was able to kind of use that as a launching pad back into Classic. And as far as what I see for the future, I'd like to keep riding that wave back and forth to help me keep progressing forward. I'm actually looking at, don't quote me on this, and I hope nobody holds me to it too harshly, but I'm hoping to get back into equipment at the end of the year, this year. I'd like to do nationals and Classic Worlds, both raw this year. And then I'm looking at hopefully taking a shot at Commonwealths in New Zealand in the fall, provided, things get better and travel is a thing again. But I'd like to get back into the equipment, I think, end of this year to do that. So I don't see myself really like picking one or sitting firmly on one side of the fence. I think I'd like to continue to bounce back and forth and just do whatever the hell I want, which has kind of been my motto for as long as I can remember.
Having that agency definitely, like, there's a freedom in it.
Definitely keeps like training enjoyment very high, because obviously like you're at a level where progressing is probably tough enough. Adding kilos onto your total is like, it's a long process. So being able to go between the two of them, like keep like at your level, like keeping training enjoyment is going to be, well, at any level, keeping training enjoyment is going to be quite high. But I suppose that's something that even people who, they get past their newbie gains and they do meet any kind of resistance, like you can opt to do things that are just going to make training a bit more enjoyable instead of like trying to repeat the same training program over and over and over again. Because you might get some kind of new results from it
that seem to like take off when they first start, or have a really brilliant sort of trajectory. But the thing is, everybody's going to have that meet where they total less than they did before at some point, whether it's injury related, whether it's training staleness, whether it's whatever. Everybody's going to run into that. And the sport, I think what he was trying to get at was that there's an element of the sport that doesn't begin until then, where you start to realize the slog and the grind and all those kinds of things that are maybe a little less attractive to people and are definitely kind of representative of a certain, I don't know, it's a certain hardship that you don't really understand until you get there. But his analogy of like everybody finds their hill and has to climb their hill, and sometimes we run uphill and sometimes we get these brief downhill spurts, but that inevitably everybody will come across this kind of hardship. And I think it's unfortunate because a lot of lifters get there and then they're like, oh, okay, I'm done, I'm out. And it's interesting to think about how many more fantastic, incredible lifters and people in the community we'd have to look up to and to have, talk about this kind of stuff if more people stuck with it. And I don't think that's definitely not a slight against people who decide they don't want to do it anymore. But yeah, I think it's an interesting sort of change in a powerlifter's career when they kind of start coming up against that stuff. And it's interesting to see how different people deal with that very differently.
How would you, like, say somebody does come to that kind of point where they are kind of met with that resistance, like what type of advice would you give them, or what type of like strategies would you like try to give them to kind of get through even that mental block?
I think like you touched on, I think a great solution, which is to try to find some other way to keep it fun. And I think the important thing is just to like try to keep going in whatever form that might take. If you want to like do mostly isolation work and body build, if you want to go up a weight class, go down a weight class, just I think finding change and novelty within a sport that's so repetitive and so specific can be a really big boon when you get stuck in those moments. See if you can implement a new bar into your training, or a new programming style, or a new exercise, or whatever that might be. I think my coach Mike T is a great example of this. And for a number of years, he had some hip issues similar to mine, but he kind of pulled way back off and didn't really squat and deadlift for maybe 2 years. So he trained his front squat and he trained his pull up, in place of those and treated those like his competition lifts, just shifted the focus. And now within the last, I think, month or two, he's announced that he wants to, get back on the platform, and he's hitting big lifts again, and he's having fun with training. And I think him being able to shift that focus from, okay, these are the only 3 lifts that matter, to like, is it the lifts that matter, or is it this feeling of like chasing progression within something that is lifting that's the driver? So yeah, I think that opens it up further to like, yeah, at a base level, you kind of need to start to understand your why and why you're doing this and what drives you and what you get out of it, and then try to prolong that and try to hold on to that and figure out other ways to get that out of the sport when the sport maybe doesn't want to give it to you.
Yeah, it's definitely a sport that, I suppose, from people that get involved in it, we've all seen the shooting stars, kind of those that rise rapidly and, like you said, have some kind of setback, be it injury or poor performance, or maybe they're not as bought into it maybe as they or maybe they're not as committed maybe as they originally thought they were. But it is a sport that can be very unforgiving, and that, I suppose, within the realm of sports science, we call it burnout, or even it can happen in nursing and job professions. But like it is, like you said, it's a very intense endeavor to say to yourself, I'm going to be doing this for the rest of my life. But you seem to have a fairly good examples of, I suppose, Shane and yourself. I'm just this unidimensional person, just as powerlifting. But to break up your training, to have that autonomy and that agency to say, look, I have the power to walk away from this and do something else, and know you're going to come back to it. And that's, to me, that's true commitment to the overall thing. One thing I am curious about, and I suppose maybe it goes a little bit off topic, but I'd like to talk to you about your training differences between equipped and raw. So just for some people that listen to this are powerlifters, and some people that listen to this might be like peripherally involved in maybe like the strength and conditioning sphere. So do you want to just talk through the differences maybe in like just equipped and raw powerlifting, and then maybe through your kind of different approaches to the two?
Sure. So I guess as a primer for anybody who's not familiar with equipped lifting, let's maybe outline classic lifting first. But basically, we're competing across the squat, bench, and the deadlift. We have 3 attempts. The highest successful attempt of each discipline gets added up to a total, which is how you compete within your weight class. And the difference between equipped and classic, as you might expect, is the equipment you use. So in the squat, in classic lifting, you're using just a belt and knee sleeves and wrist wraps. And in equipped squatting, you're going to use a supportive suit made out of a really stiff and sharp feeling material, as well as knee wraps. So you're using this equipment, and I think it initially came about as a way to try to prolong lifters' careers and to help people, just get more out of their bodies. It was very slightly supportive when things first started, but quickly became a game of like, okay, I think if we reinforce this seam here and we use this material instead of this one, yeah, we can get some kilos on the bar here. So it's gotten to a place, and even in single ply, and we mentioned single ply because there is another version of equipped lifting where the lifter uses multiple plies of equipment. So single ply equipped lifting is sort of synonymous with the IPF and drug tested powerlifting, whereas multiply is generally competed in other federations and the drug testing practices of which may be any number of things. Hey,
or just non-existent.
Or non-existent, yeah, exactly. So yeah, you use supportive equipment. The bench, you have a bench shirt, which basically binds up around the sleeves and the chest, and makes it really, really, really hard to bench. But if you can do it well, you can bench a lot more than you can raw. And the deadlift suit is similar to the squat suit, but I think probably the least difference in a lifter's raw deadlift and equipped deadlift. Although some lifters can get a fair bit out of a suit, it's nothing like the other two. I think if we're looking at a squat suit and wraps, A lot of people are getting 100 kilos or more in addition to what they could do classic. Bench shirts, probably about the same number for lifters who are really proficient, 100 kilos. And I would say with the deadlift suit, anywhere from like 5 to 25 kilos, I would say is probably a pretty big carryover.
So now that's kind of outlined. What is the difference in your approach to your, say, your training when you're training equipped versus training raw? Is there differences in maybe like how you vary intensity? Is there differences in your frequency or volume? I suppose that's kind of, let's start with just to get straight into.
Yeah. So honestly, I think a lot of lifters, and specifically when I first transitioned into equipped lifting, I think there were a lot of more veteran equipped lifters that looked at what I was doing and said, what the hell is this kid doing? That's so stupid. You can't do that. You can't get away with that. You're gonna wear out your equipment. You're gonna blow yourself up. You're not gonna be successful doing that. You can't do it. Because basically I just train the same as I would classic with maybe slightly less volume per session. But I would get in my full suit, squat suit, straps up, wraps once a week. I would get in my bench, try to get a touch out of it every week. And I would get in my deadlift suit every week. So I would essentially have 2 very, very big days at the front of the week where I would do equip squat and bench in one session and then equip deadlift in the next session, as well as any of my, raw bench and whatever else that day. But the accessories that I used for the development of my equipped lifts was raw powerlifting. So I would basically have half a week where I lifted equipped and half a week where I lifted raw, and honestly, not a lot changed. But yeah, I was going up to, 89, 90% in equipment every week. I was trying to get touches out of the shirt, which again is like a kind of controversial thing. A lot of lifters will use boards to limit the range of motion, and train more that way, as opposed to the way that I would train is I would just take whatever weight I had in my hands as far as it would go. And sometimes it would touch and sometimes it wouldn't. But I think there's a lot of, maybe dogmatic, sort of older thoughts about the way that equipped lifting is supposed to be executed. And I think that I came out of the gates and did a lot of things very differently. And I credit that obviously to my coach, who was like, yeah, no, you just do the same thing, but in equipment. And I was like, well, you won the world games, so I'll do what you say. And yeah, I ended up having a lot of success, but not a lot changed. There was maybe a little bit more emphasis on doing some of my developmental and preparatory exercises, putting an emphasis on top end things. So, lifting against bands and chains, maybe doing some slingshot work or raw bench against boards.
From someone, I suppose, that would, I love discussing programming, and one thing I suppose that anybody would look at the older, say the West Side, I suppose, as an EF one, most people really came across the specificity in the programming of West Side would be quite low. I mean, you might be doing a competition exercise maybe like for maybe once every 2 weeks, maybe if you have it, in, maybe not even for weeks, for blocks. Do you think that specificity in your programming for equipped, because I mean for raw powerlifting it's obvious. I mean, obviously you're going to do a comp squat, obviously you're going to do a comp deadlift, obviously you're probably going to do a comp bench in that week. It's very rare you'll ever pick up a powerlifter's program and not see that in that. Do you think that early, like you said, exposure to the specifics of actually what you'll be doing in comp kind of contributed to that kind of quick rise?
I think for sure. And I think specifically as someone who had a substantial history and sort of base ability in classic lifting, I think it helped me transfer those skills into equipped lifting faster. And I think maybe some of the efficacy in a lot of the less specific stuff is for people who don't have that same background to build, very specific skills. And like, who knows? It's a Pandora's box of Louis Simmons' brain. But I think that having that specificity very early on and having a high level of specificity definitely allowed me to kind of maximize what I was able to do in the equipment way faster, because it was specific, because like I was trying to get to depth every week. So I had, 8 practice runs with, 3 reps each. So I was basically doing a meet worth of squatting for 8 weeks, and then taking a week or 2 off, and then 8 weeks worth of meet squatting. So yeah, I absolutely think that helped a lot. And that's something that I advocate in the equipped lifters that I train now. Maybe not with such a heavy hand. Obviously you got to leave a lot of room for individual differences and different skill levels and, tolerances for especially things like loading. So I don't know if I went back to equipped lifting now, things might be different. I might not be able to train the way that I did before. And I think it'll be really interesting to get back into that with the differences I've had in my own sort of recovery capacity as I've gotten older and more beat up.
I suppose that's another thing I was about to come to. When you did kind of make the transition, you did say your kind of injuries or niggles did factor into it a little bit. Did you see any kind of differences in your recovery from equipped, between equipped and raw? Did you see any differences there? Did you kind of feel a bit fresher after the equipped sessions, I suppose, with the alleviation of pain?
It was like very differently taxing, right? It wasn't necessarily that, oh, like my quads are killing me from doing, 6 sets of squats yesterday. It was more like I need a nap.
It's
for a day and a half.
I'm talking out of a good few friends that are compete equipped, and they would always say after a heavy squat session, it's not like your body is beat up. Like it is neural fatigue. I mean, ultimately you're going to have, like you said, maybe an extra 100 kilos or 150 kilos, depending on how good you are with your equipment, than you would squat normally. So I mean, the fatigue can be far more central than peripheral, and then you accumulate it over a heavy training block or so, and it's easy to imagine how that could beat the shit out of you.
Yeah. There's something about it I like, though. Like I like that feeling after doing, a whole bunch of equipped bench the day before, where it just feels like your triceps got hit with baseball bats for like a couple hours, and it's just like this deep, gross soreness all the way down to the bone. And yeah, like there's obviously some, I think, masochistic tendencies in any power lifter who's like, oh yeah, I did good yesterday because I feel like shit today. But yeah, there's definitely like a whole added layer of that in equipped lifting, especially once you get into like the pain that it is at the time. As you get into the bottom of the squat, there's just an immense amount of pressure and the bite of the knee wraps and the bite of the suit, and it just like, I don't know. It's weird because I feel like when I talk about it, I'm not selling it, but it's awesome.
Did you find any transfer from the overload you got? So obviously, like for anybody who doesn't know, like you said earlier, you are probably lifting. If you have mastered your equipment, I suppose you could be lifting anywhere on the squat to 100 kilos more. Guys could be you could be benching like maybe 50 to 100 kilos more, and you could be deadlifting maybe like, as we said, like 5 to 20, 25 kilos more. Did you gain any adaptations from the overload of that equipment exposed you to when you went back to your raw lifting?
I think to an extent, definitely handling those loads in the squat suit where I had no pain, I think put me in a better position to like not expect the pain when I was lifting raw, and to, in some cases, not experience the pain when I was lifting raw. My hip thing is very anomalous, and I've never really had any proper diagnosis or treatment of it. I've just kind of found different ways to lift around it, but it does seem to be impacted by getting good pain-free stimulus. That's probably the number one thing I can do to desensitize my hip, is like do the things that hurt it, but light enough that they don't hurt it. And then eventually I'm able to just kind of go for it and load it. But so that was, I think, a big adaptation with my squat, was just being more confident, being more comfortable. I think with my bench, we found out that, yeah, definitely training the top end for me and a little bit more tricep centric training does push my bench a little bit. So I found after my first training block or two in equipment, my raw bench did go pretty well, and correlation versus causation, who knows, but I think there was maybe something there, maybe some carryover there. As for the deadlift, I think it may be a little bit more picky in how I moved and my technique, because the suit really amplifies any errors that I make, especially in that sort of instant before I lift the bar off the floor. So pulling into position, I had learned to be a little bit more picky, a little bit more patient, and a little bit more consistent. So there's definitely some carryovers, but maybe not in the way that people would think, where it's like, oh, I lifted this heavy thing, so now I'm gonna be able to do it raw.
I suppose, like you said, it just kind of shifted. It allowed you to even shift the attentional focus towards something else, and give that hip time to tolerate load. One thing, I suppose there was one post I remember you put up a while back on Instagram that I thought was interesting, was the idea of hypertrophy for powerlifting. You kind of said something that echoes a lot of my thoughts around hypertrophy for powerlifting, that should be specific. Like, realistically, I mean, Shane talks about it all the time. If you have like fucking 20-inch pythons and 20-inch calves, and you've like, you know, muscles that don't contribute massively to your squat, bench, or deadlift, is probably just, maybe if you're on a as well, like, take him away. For the equipped end of things, did your, I suppose, hypertrophy training change a little bit? You talk about the strength. You said earlier there was a little bit on learning the strength curves, and I suppose that's definitely one thing in what we tend to see far more knee flexion and knee extension involved, which calls on the quads. Even if you squat in a lower bar position, that with those will still be the primary movers, and a little bit of the hip. Whereas when we look at equipped powerlifting, we tend, even in single ply gear, we tend to see a lot less happen at the shin, which means the hips will be far more involved. And that's just one lift. I mean, like you said, very little might happen on the deadlift, but even in the single ply bench or equipped bench, we tend to see much less of an or much, I suppose, greater involvement of the tricep in that, because in the deep portions of the movement, obviously the load is shifted onto the plate or the shirt. So there are small, like you said, changes to the strength curve. Did that change your emphasis on your hypertrophy training, I suppose, is where I'm trying to get with this?
I think the biggest thing was that it created sort of a different spectrum of specificity, right? Because I think normally we look at this spectrum of specificity, and we've got like comp singles at one end, and then maybe like comp threes, comp fives, and then, you know, you get into your SDEs and SPEs and stuff like that are to train the movement or to train the muscles involved in the movement. And I think what equipped lifting did was it added another layer to the very specific end of things. So my hypertrophy work then became, you know, the comp work, and probably a little bit more exercise selection tilted towards top end stuff and those kinds of things. But I think if I look at the way that Mike has programmed for me, mostly we don't generally get less specific than, you know, some sort of like belt squat, leg press, split squat. Like I haven't done leg extensions in, I don't know, 7 years, or like curls or calf raises or leg curls. That is, I still throw in bicep curls because I'm vain and they're not programmed, but I do them from time to time anyways. And yeah, again, like things, you know, we might do some tricep isolation movement, but generally speaking, you know, like we're doing a stiff legged deadlift as opposed to I don't know, like a seated hamstring curl. So it did like change that window of where the specificity lay and where we would try to look for that hypertrophy stimulus. But at the same time, I think hypertrophy at that point was relatively low down in the priorities, because I had kind of committed to the 105s for a lot of my equipped career. And then, yeah, I don't know that we really changed things all that much programming wise when it comes to trying to achieve hypertrophy. I think it's more of a nutritional focus, you know, and then, yeah.
You kind of 105 really, I suppose, was the focus then, I suppose, when you're at the upper limits of that weight class. I mean, as you said, like the priority of getting bigger is going to be a lot less. It's just going to be making weight on the day. As poor old Shane knows there. Shane's one of the most jacked 93s here in Ireland. Don't let that smile fool you. I suppose, like, one thing for people to take away, I suppose, from this is that if they do ever kind of jump to the dark side of powerlifting, that is equipped powerlifting, change training a whole lot.
That's ambiguous, Lawrence. Saying dark side of powerlifting, like, you know,
I suppose
one or two ways, like.
The dark natty side, I suppose, maybe, if you want to call it that. I don't know, what would it be?
Yeah.
I suppose in the IPF, that's the dark side. But don't need to change training that much. Yeah.
How did you find actually the increase from 105s to the 120s? Because obviously, like, that's like you started off at 83 and then gradually over years went up to 105, but like you went up to from 105 to 120 in a relatively short period of time. How do you find that transition? Like how did you find even just managing the food intake?
I would say that I'm still trying to make the transition properly here. I think I got pretty close to 120 for a little bit, and then was like, oh, I don't feel so good. I don't think I look very good, and I don't know that, you know, I'm really maximizing my like the performance related metrics that I would look at this body weight. Like, I don't know that this extra body weight at this point is doing it for me. So I cut back down to, I think, 113, 114. And I bounced around a number of times up and down, and had myself to a pretty solid 118 for a little while. And then holidays, COVID, etc. So now I'm back down around 115, 116. And I'm, you know, hopefully by, I think the plan is about by June next year. So hopefully by Worlds, I'm up 121, 122. But the biggest, like, I've always had to basically push the food, even just to maintain weight. My body just is not, it doesn't want to be this big. So if I don't track food and I'm not mindful of it, I will sort of default to losing weight. So it's kind of been a struggle since 83. But yeah, I noticed that I definitely, like, I can't go hiking like I used to. I think at 105, I had found a really good sort of set point, even around 108, where I could go out and hike on the weekends and participate in kind of whatever I wanted to do, and still feel all right, not really feel the effects of the additional weight. But definitely once I moved up to 120, it was like, okay, you know, if we're going to be here, we're going to pretty much just be a power lifter for now. So that's the kind of trade-off of it. But I also found, you know, my squat started moving a little bit better. My bench started moving a little bit better. I had to retool my deadlift and kind of mess around with that for 6 to 8 months or so before I could get it where I wanted. But I've hit my biggest deadlifts of all time at 120. So I haven't, you know, lost that capacity, which is nice. I think a lot of the times there is definitely a point of diminishing returns for the deadlift.
Yeah. I think it's definitely something that probably a lot of new lifters shy away from, is the kind of moving up of weight classes, because I suppose maybe they are maybe they have mixed goals, like they maybe have the aesthetic goal as well as the kind of performance goal. But I suppose if you are looking to kind of double down on one, it's probably a good idea to especially work towards your height. Like what height are you?
What am I in centimeters? Like 160, 170. I'm 5'11", whatever that is.
You're about 180 centimeters.
180. Okay, never mind.
So like that's, yeah, just slightly taller than me. So, you know, realistically, if you are around that frame, probably is a good idea to look towards like the 105s in around there. If you're going to be performing at your max 105s, 120s, realistically, No,
Yeah, I mean, I went to Worlds in 2016, and there's this photo of me next to Bryce Lewis and Steve Emmanuel. And I mean, those guys are like 5'6", 5'7", and they're just houses.
Yeah.
So I kind of, I had the same kind of moment that I had very early on at 83 when I saw the guy who had set all the provincial records at 83, and he was, like a foot shorter than me. And I was like, oh, I don't belong in this weight class. So yeah, again, seeing those guys at 105 being like, I don't know, man, I think I'm still too tall. Like I'm still too skinny. So yeah, I think 120 is kind of the place to be for me to maximize the competitiveness that I crave. So
yeah, no, that makes sense. But I suppose when people do kind of get in those initial stages, I suppose it's when the newbie gains stop, I suppose it has to come from elsewhere. All of those initial kind of neuromuscular adaptations do unfortunately slow down. And you kind of have to put leverages and weight and putting on the muscle where it counts.
Yeah, and I think, like, I don't know, for anyone who's relatively novice or intermediate, like if you can control that and just get yourself into a very, very slight surplus and just gain, like a few kilos a year even, I think that just puts you in such a better place to take advantage of your training and to maximize your input, into as far as what you're getting out of it. And I just think so many people have such a better time when you talk to somebody who's like, yeah, my first like 3 years, I just spent slowly bulking, versus somebody who's like, yeah, I cut for my first 4 meets and I was doing water cuts and I was like trying to maintain in this weight that was too light for me. You get a very different sense and a very different story of sort of a person's start in the sport between those two scenarios. So yeah, if I can push anybody in the like, let's slowly gain weight so that training is more fun and works better direction, I would definitely advise that.
Ultimately, I suppose, like when you're 20 or 21, be in a deficit for 6 months to try and get down into a 74 kilo weight class or an 83 kilo weight class when you're already like 5'10" or 5'11. Just like you said, like the long-term efficacy of that, you're just robbing yourself of gains and increased totals.
Mm-hmm. One question I wanted to ask, actually, just in relation to that, right, was so then, like, what advice would you give a younger Bryce?
I get this question pretty often, and I feel like I have the worst answer ever for it, because I would probably just like watch from a distance and do all the same shit over again. I honestly, I think that pretty much everything I did has lent itself to me being able to approach things the way that I do now, and see things the way that I do now, and have the kind of mentality and attitude towards training that I have now, as well as learn a lot about programming by, doing dumb stuff. So I don't know that I would actually go back and change anything, because I'm not sure I would give myself a leg up. I might just run into, different problems. And at this point, I'm pretty okay with the problems that I've had and have. And yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I would change anything.
Yeah, that's an okay answer. I suppose that's why you are where you are.
Yeah, and it all makes sense, like that kind of perspective. For you then, like, I suppose you're still a pretty young guy with a lot of mileage left to go on the clock.
Knock on wood, man. Knock on wood.
What would be your kind of like ideal situation, I suppose, maybe in 5 or 10 years time, with what you aim to do competing wise, maybe like other projects that you're working on, obviously, like what you have going on in Calgary Barbell. For anyone just involved in powerlifting, it's an excellent resource there to have. Even even if you're just spinning around, I suppose, ideas in your head, what would those be?
I mean, I just want to keep competing, man. I want I want to get back to worlds as many times as I can. I want to place as high as I can. I want to hopefully, crack that podium another few times, another number of times, maybe even. It's just that constant feeling of like, okay, I've got way more to show. I've got way more that I can do. And kind of as soon as I come off the platform every time, it's like, it's not dissatisfaction. It's just not contentment. And I think that's kind of what keeps me going, is that I feel like there's more that I could have done or more that I can do in the future. So, I talk about it a lot in terms of, I'm not that guy that's like, I'm going to be number one. I'm going to be the world champion. I'm going to destroy everyone. It's like, I want to go and I want to compete against the best. And I want to be in the mix. That's what I want. I want to be vying for position. I want to be, on somebody's radar. I want to be making somebody sweat. And I want to be messing around with third deadlift attempts and changes. You know what I mean? Like that's the kind of stuff I thrive on. I'm not like, I don't know. So I think in that it's kind of that like process oriented. Like I just want to have that process. And then, the outcome can kind of be whatever it is. And hopefully the outcome gets better sometimes. And it's, that's one of the things that I think I really want to focus on for the next little while is like, I want to place better. I want to, beat more people and that kind of thing. And I guess longer term, I'd like to be, that guy that's been doing it forever and is still, putting the fear of God in the young whippersnappers. So, the Dave Ricks, the Anthony Harris, the Tony Cliff. Although I don't know if he's that old, but I'm gonna throw that at Tony anyways.
Yeah, it sounds like you're a fairly competitive guy. I think beneath it all, that's kind of one thing I'm definitely getting off you. It's subdued. You're trying to rein it in a little bit, but I'm definitely getting that off you. You're going to be there. Yeah. M4s or the M5s in a couple of years. throwing shade all the other 74 and 75-year-olds in the 120 equipped and raw class.
That's the plan, yeah.
No, I love it. And I think like, I suppose even for myself, like I get so much out of competing like that. Even if like you said, like I suppose you're quite an interesting example, because I mean, like you're a world record holder in the IPF. Like, I mean, you're at the cusp of where people can go in the sport, but you're also turning around and saying in the same sentence, I just want to be competitive. And it's like, it's very, I suppose, refreshing, but for, I suppose, me and Shane are always saying it to each other, like ultimately when people look back in the annals of Irish powerlifting, Shane Story and Lawrence King aren't going to be two names that are popping up at anyone, but somehow we still wake up at stupid o'clock on a Sunday morning to train and put our bodies through hell, ultimately. Even after 10 or 15 years down the line, there's still going to be some 19 or 20-year-old and fucking stupid numbers, and we're going to be drawing crumbs. But I suppose it's just that love for the sport, that love for competing, that kind of drags you on. And to hear that from someone of your level, I suppose if people are here and they're listening to it and they're 20 or 21, they've done one or two meets and they're kind of thinking where it can go, or where if they're a little bit disillusioned that, oh shit, I'm not national champion here in my third meet, like that you're a walking testament to that, I suppose. If you're a little bit competitive and you're a little bit driven, that's
and I think that's one of the beautiful things about the sport too, is you can kind of find competition at your level, right? Regardless of sort of what like how you stack up in the grand scheme of things. Like I find my competition at IPF Worlds. You might be able to find your competition at, like, you just find your competition where whatever level you're at, and that has been what I've done the whole time. I never set out to be, oh, I'm gonna go to IPF Worlds, I'm gonna break world records. Like, that was not something that I had in my head when I started. When I had that meet, that provincial meet with this one other guy, 2014, that was what I sought out. That was what I wanted, was like, okay, what's next? Like, how do I find more of this? where are there more people like this that are like my level, that are my body weight, that I can just like have this epic sort of, you know, battle with, because that was what I was craving. And for me, that was okay. We'll go to nationals next. And, you know, I came in second at my first nationals in a really tight race. And then from there, you know, it was like, okay, next nationals, I can't fucking wait. And it just like, you know, it just kind of snowballed from there. But I think if you can get into that habit of like, you know, if for you the local meet is where you find your competition, then thrive in that, and use that to fuel yourself, and just like, you know, drink it in, because that's what it's all about.
Immerse.
Yeah, I think that's one thing as well that stops people from getting like into powerlifting initially, is they find that they won't be competitive enough.
Yeah,
you know, and like even like I would have clients who want to do meets, or like I've taught people who want to do meets, and like they say they just want to wait until they're ready or they're competitive enough. And like it's always the same answer. It's like you're never going to be competitive enough, because unless you're like in a position where you could win worlds, like you're always going to have competition, or you're always going to have some level of competition, you know. And thankfully in Ireland we do have a lot of beginner meets, you know, meets for people who are first time, who will be competing against people who've never competed either. So like, you know, there's that entry level, there's that competition for you, and there's going to be no standard. And come back to what we said at the very start, there's that community aspect, and the people in at that meet, regardless of whether it's your first meet or your 10th meet, they're all going to be there cheering you on for your last deadlift.
Yeah. And you might be competing for like 6th place at a local meet. You know what I mean? Like you might be just starting out and you're trying to jump that person in 7th. That's your goal. You know what I mean? But if that's where you're at, like that's the shit. You know what I mean? Like that's what I would chase down. That's what I would focus on if I were you, as opposed to being like, oh, there's this guy who wins nationals who happened to be at this meet, so he's going to win our class. And that's not even, there's no competition. And it's like, well, look at who's around you at that meet and then compete with them. You know what I mean? Like, don't worry about that guy who's going to total 200 kilos ahead of the rest of the class, because like nobody's touching that guy, whatever. Like stay in your lane. And I think like, I just think you can get so much out of that kind of competition, and make so many good friends. Some of my best friends in powerlifting are people that friggin' Eric Willis. That's who I lost to in 2015 at nationals. We have yet to have our rematch, but he's one of my best friends in powerlifting. You know, we go to meets and we hang out for the whole week and we drink beers at the end of it, and it's a great time. But you know, I still want to kick his ass. So
speaking of meets, eating, drinking, right? So here in our club in Ireland, we run a meet once a year. It's called Abs Pro. I don't think you've came across it before. So it's ran like an IPF meet to IPF standards, except it's non-sanctioned. It's not ran by a federation, it's ran by us. And the rules are wraps are allowed, and everything else is ran to IPF rules. It is the weekend, it's the last weekend in August, Shane, I think, is it?
This year, yes, I think so.
This year, I'm going to double check that, Bryce or Bruce, Bryce or Bruce can come. I mean, look, one or the other.
It's a 500 dots plus invite only.
Yeah, maybe Bruce could sign up for that one.
So the 13th of August. I don't think Jay would mind me cordially inviting him, Shane.
Yeah, well, that's if the man is free. I mean, if he's going to be doing classic worlds.
I mean, ultimately, you're invited.
Yeah.
Okay.
But if you were ever open to the idea of coming to Ireland, it is a very cool meet, and it's kind of growing every year. And this August as well, and even April is going to be very competitive, very spicy. But if you ever were coming to Ireland, or if you ever were interested, that would definitely be. I'd love to see you in a raw with wraps.
Is it a deadlift bar too?
Power bar for everything.
Okay.
The way the series is ran. So Series 9, the upcoming one. If you were in, you'd obviously be in the Pro-Am division. So Some of them are ran more like typical untested meets where there's a squat bar, monolift for squat, and then benches, power bar, and then deadlift is deadlift bar. But the idea with the Abs Pro originally was that here in Ireland, a lot of the best lifters were IPF. But you also had some very high level untested lifters as well. So the original idea of the inception of the Abs Pro was to pit them head to head. And it wasn't ran via a federation, so IPF lifters could compete without that affecting their national team status or anything like that. So there has been some, like there was an Irish guy won the first 2 Abs Pros, Barry Piggott. He held.
I remember Barry from 2018 Worlds for sure.
Yeah, Barry Piggott won the first 1 or 2. Then the most recent was Luke Tallman. He's an English guy. He's 21. Non-IPF lifter. He's competes untested, but he did 900 at I think 98 or 99 kilos.
Holy cow!
Recently, so every year the standard is getting better. But it's a cool meet, and I suppose for the likes of you in North America, a lot of those kind of meets tend to be one or the other. They tend to be ran by federations as well. So obviously, which are within the IPF, it's a lot harder to compete in those kind of meets. So, yeah, something you'd ever be interested in, you let us know.
I feel like IPF rules meet with knee wraps sounds pretty damn good. I think this year it's going to be like our nationals isn't till May now. Worlds is tentatively scheduled for June. And then I'm looking at that equip meet. It's like September.
August is
so
down to the ground.
Might be a little quick for turnaround there, but I'll definitely keep that in mind if that's something in future years that I can make work with the schedule. Yeah. I'd love to get to Ireland for sure.
Definitely, because even a lot of those, like not a lot of those, but the Abs Pro runs around the same time every year. It's August every year. So if you were doing like a raw, no, I know you're on about doing the Commonwealth later in the year, but there are kind of like Heather Connor came over.
Mm-hmm. And Maria T. Maria.
Nice.
Maria
okay. Won, didn't she?
Yeah, Maria won this year.
She won female. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's sick.
If you wanted to come over and bump up the Canadian contingency,
I'd love to.
That
sounds great.
2023. That'd be cool. Look, man, we'll let you we'll leave you off because I'd say we're your time. And thanks so much for coming on. It was really cool talking to you. I've been following you for a long time. A lot of the stuff you put out has been really helpful to baby powerlifting learns. Even like the like Shane said, the kind of mini documentary stuff you put out is really cool.
Great to watch before a session.
Well, I mean, yeah, I absolutely appreciate you guys having me on, and it was a great conversation. You guys asked some really good questions, and I think provoked some really good discussion. So, yeah, it was great.
Bryce, could I get you to tell everybody where they can find you?
For sure. So you can find me and pretty much everything I do on calgarybarbell.com. We are Calgary Barbell on YouTube, and you can follow us on Instagram at Calgary Barbell, or me, my training log and such on Instagram at Bryce_CBB.
Ideal. Grand. I'll leave all that details in the description. So yeah, Bryce, thank you very much for having you on. Really appreciate the time.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
So yeah, if you enjoyed the podcast, make sure to leave a rating or review. If you're not subscribed, you better be subscribed now. Yeah, give us some feedback on the podcast. We should have the next episode sometime out in the next year. And yeah, we'll chat to you very soon. Have a great day.